All right, everybody, welcome into the Go 24/7 podcast. I am Glenn West. That is Sonny's ship. Sonny, we're about a little over 2 weeks into fall camp. We're kind of in week 3 now, and we'll have some more practice reports and things of that nature later in the week. But today, we're going to be focusing on recruiting and obviously a big month of August for LSU on the recruiting trail, getting a couple of commitments here early in the month, I should say, with 4-star Deuce Gerald's, 3-star Darius McKinley, both hopping on board to that defensive line class. And that's kind of where I wanted to start with you today, Sonny. Those two commitments, obviously, this marks a pretty substantial defensive line class that LSU is building here in the 2026 class. And when you include Lamar Brown and Trenton Henderson and all those guys that they've brought in that position room, I'm curious. Just you've obviously been around the recruiting game a lot more than I have over the last 25 years. Just where does this group, if we play the hypothetical here and they're able to carry that group into the December signing period, where would that rank in your opinion in terms of defensive line hauls from a recruiting standpoint on paper?
You definitely got to say on paper, it would be one of their more impressive haul, definitely of recent memory. But I mean, you can go back to some of those from the early 2000s. You had Marcus Spears, Marquise Hill in the same class. You had some other classes like that where you had several guys. But I think the thing that really, I guess, impresses me about this haul right here is that, yeah, you had Lamar Brown and you had Richard Anderson in state, and you took advantage of having those two guys in state. But then you also went out and you got Trenton Henderson out of Florida, big 5-star. You got Deuce Gerald's out of Georgia, a big 4-star defensive lineman, guys that they're really excited about. And so, as far as if you're looking at and saying, okay, can we check that box? I think you can check that box. If you sign all 6 of these guys right here, I think you can check that box. And that gives you 10 of the 18 commitments in this class that are down in the trenches. And you've heard over and over that, if you want to win championships in the SEC, you got to have the big boys up front. And so Brian Kelly and them are definitely doing a good job of doing that. Now it's just trying to see if you can finish with, if you could finish with the big cherry on top and five-star center Darius Gray, who is about, let's see, I guess about 10 days away from announcing.
Yeah, August 22nd, Darius Gray announces here his recruitment or his commitment. Handful of schools that are still involved, but it really does kind of feel like it's coming down to a final 2 here. At least that's where it's trending right now. You never know who could hop in at the last second, but LSU and South Carolina are the 2 schools I think we're hearing about most right now with Darius Gray. I know you wrote about it a little bit earlier this week on the site, and I would encourage a lot of people to go check that out. But just your overall thoughts on where Darius Gray sits with LSU right now and kind of where that recruitment is going.
Yeah, 2 months ago, after he visited in the spring, a lot of the Darius Gray to LSU talk really started picking up and ramping up, and then his official visit in June knocked it out of the park. The thing that's really come into play though down the stretch is Columbia, South Carolina is a little bit over 300 miles from home, his home in Virginia. Meanwhile, LSU is 900 plus. And I think you're starting to see that distance factor become a little more of a reality. And look, that's not uncommon at all. Take Blaine Bradford, for instance, the 5-star safety out of Baton Rouge who's committed to Ohio State. There's not a doubt in my mind that even if some things wouldn't have happened between, with Sam Petito coming to LSU from Ohio State, and that things hadn't kind of started to shift a little bit more favorably towards LSU than they had been for a while, eventually they would have. And the reason I say that is because as these kids start thinking about it, and it's nice and great to say, hey, I'm going to school I'm going to school in Ohio, in Michigan, in Oregon, California, wherever. And then as it gets close for that 18-year-old to leave home and to leave mama's side,
Yeah.
that proximity to home, it really usually starts to come into play. And I think that's what we see here with Darius Gray. The good thing is that I don't I don't hear that this is now to where it's NIL centric, meaning that South Carolina just gave him a huge NIL offer, or if LSU gives him a huge NIL offer, that could be what tips the scales back in LSU's favor. But I'm a little hesitant to jump on that bandwagon just because NIL hasn't really been as big of a focus with him as we see it with some others. And so, I really think the best thing that LSU has on its side right now is the development that Brad Davis can point to and that Brian Kelly can point to, as well as looking at the depth chart, looking at opportunities, but then that relationship that Davis has with Gray. Those are the things that really elevated LSU in his mind. There's nothing they can do about the distance factor right now. They can't change how close LSU is to his home in Virginia. So you just really, over these next 10 days, you really just have to harp on those relationships. And then, see if there is an NIL angle that you can work. See if there is, if there is an opening that can kind of, create a little more opportunity, open the door a little bit more with that. But these next 10 days, I think, are going to be critical for Brad Davis and company to see if they can bring this across the finish line. If not, though, it's not going to be the end of the world. LSU already has one interior guy who they project as a center in this class, in Jalen Chapman. So it's not like they, are going to all of a sudden have to go searching for someone else to fill that spot. So, but it's going to be interesting to see. Like I mentioned in that piece you referred to, not a really big senior class for LSU. Transfer portal, muddies the waters as far as trying to figure out, okay, how many spots do you have? Because those spots what you have right now are going to change. Yeah. And so, LSU is going to lose at least, let's see, I think if my math is right, at least 16 guys off of this roster. And then they could potentially lose another 4 who I have circled as guys who could potentially leave for the NFL early. So you're already in that situation to where, you're bringing in more than you're losing, just what on the surface.
Yeah. No, no, absolutely, no question there. And I just kind of wanted to piggyback off what you were saying about Gray and kind of the relationships he has with the staff. One of our national recruiting analysts, Brian Doan, actually, we're starting all the preview pieces right now for that commitment that's coming on August 22nd. And so he actually caught up with Darius and asked him about kind of his relationships with the different schools that are kind of in play for him right now. And they asked him like what the best relationship he has, with all the coaches that he's come in contact with throughout his recruitment. And he said Brad Davis and Joe Sloan and LSU and all those guys are right there at the top. I want to make sure I get this quote right, so I'm just going to read it here. He says, I would say LSU with the offensive line coach Brad Davis and offensive coordinator Joe Sloan. The relationship there is real tight, and that speaks for itself. I think that there's some more that's going to have to play out here over the next 9 to 10 days for LSU to really feel confident about that decision and that commitment. And I do think another thing, as you kind of mentioned there, that plays into LSU's favor is the fact that a lot of the offensive line production that they have in this class are tackles. And, Darius Gray is going to be an interior lineman. He's going to be a center. So I do think that the LSU's in a really good spot from that perspective. But like you mentioned, the only uncontrollable right now is how much that distance factor really comes into play with him. And so, I think right now there's probably some guarded optimism, but certainly some work that has to be done, I think, over the next week or 10 days to make sure that LSU can get back on the right path. And the one thing that I will say is that you mentioned the NIL piece to this as well. I think we've gotten to a point now where the NIL excuse is out the window with LSU when it comes to recruiting. Like they have proven here over the last year that they have really gotten their stuff together with NIL, and that recruitments I don't think are going to be won and lost to an extent. Like I mean, to an extent, you're not going to go overpay a guy that you don't have a real fit for or something like that. But they're not going to lose a recruit solely because some team came in and swooped in and offered a big bag at the last second. Like if LSU wants to keep that player, they're going to, or wants to get that player, they're going to pony up the amount of money and resources that are required to go get that player if they want him. So I don't really have anything else to add on Darius Gray. I think we just got to wait and see what sources are telling us here in the kind of 48 hours, 72 hours leading up to that decision. But I was really intrigued because Sonny, you did a really nice job deep diving into this piece on just kind of looking ahead in this class and a couple other players that are going to be at play in the 2026 class here over the course of the next 6 months in the fall. Blaine Bradford, obviously a name that comes to mind when you talk about just him being in Baton Rouge, his brother being on campus at LSU, been around the campus a lot throughout his career, but has committed to Ohio State and has been there for 3 or 4 months. I mean, it's been a while since he committed there. But LSU seems to be making some headways there, some early kind of entrance into maybe getting into that recruitment down the stretch. What can you tell us about Blaine Bradford and just the push that I guess LSU will have to make over the next several months to try to maybe get him a part of this class as well?
Well, the next thing that you look for in the Bradford recruitment is an unofficial visit on campus. You get him. You got to get him on campus. Yeah, with his brother being on the team, that can be an excuse for him popping up in Tiger Stadium. For one of the smaller games where Jacob might have a chance to get on the field, get some opportunities. But right now, it's all about you start checking those, you start comparing. Okay, how many times does he make his way up to Columbus? How many times does he make his way over to LSU? Because LSU is going to have to, they're going to have to play up that hometown. They're going to have to play up that local angle. They're going to have to, they're going to have to overcome the things that Ohio State was able to show him. Some of that is their tradition. Some of that is their winning. Look, LSU's got tradition. LSU's got winning and all too. For Blaine Bradford, I do think that this is going to be one of those cases to where if you want to keep him home, then you're going to come with a strong NIL offer.
Okay. What about the Petito
and the
factor?
reason, what's that?
What about the Sam Petito factor? Is that how
Yeah, I
heavily
mean,
does that
I
weigh
think
in?
I think that's helped open the door. That's opened
Yeah.
the door a little bit more. I think that allows for some, for any, I don't want to say sore feelings, but for any hurt feelings that may have developed throughout the recruiting process in the early part, those are able to be mended. But at this point, at this stage, I look at it like this: there was a reason that he committed to Ohio State. And it wasn't just because I feel slighted by LSU.
Sure.
Okay. And I'm not saying that he felt that was the case. I'm just using that as an example. There's a reason that he committed to Ohio State over LSU, over the hometown team, over his brother being there, over all those factors that were there at that time that are still there. So what's the one factor that isn't still there? What you put on that paper NIL wise. And I do believe that for LSU to turn the tide on this, so to speak, that it's going to be a combination of things. One, it's going to be developing those relationships and really fostering those strong relationships that the staff has, not only with Blaine, but also with Jacob. Jacob in Blaine's ear, telling him how much he loves it here, how much, all of that stuff is going to come into play. And those are all going to be big factors. But I think if you want to say, what is the one thing that LSU can do to overtake Ohio State? It's going to be the NIL offer. It's going to be the NIL. It's going to be, you come with where you need to get to if you really want him, if you truly value him. And you touched on that. It's not always about, oh, there's a 5-star in LSU's backyard. LSU needs to pay him whatever he wants to get him on campus. It's not about that. It's about how bad do you need him? What do you look like you need in this class? You already got Aiden Hall in this class. You got Isaiah Washington in this class. You got Dylan Purter in this class. You got 3 guys who could play safety.
Yeah.
So if you're looking at a need, Blaine Bradford is not a huge need.
He's
just
a want.
from those standpoint, he's a want. He's a want.
Yeah.
Now, when you start looking at perception, And what they say, perception is often a lot of people's reality. When you start looking at perception, then that's what makes it a situation to where LSU may feel that this is a case to where we cannot let this guy get away.
Yeah.
Kind of like you saw with Lamar Brown.
Yeah.
When there was talk that Lamar Brown might go to Texas A&M. The NIL offer that Lamar Brown had when he canceled his LSU official visit is not the same NIL offer that Lamar Brown had that got him committed to LSU.
Yeah.
And so I really think that that's going to be a big piece of it with Blaine
Mhm.
and seeing where things go and how quickly they get there. But if you ask me right now to say, okay, if you had to pick who where Blaine Bradford was going to sign in the early signing period, is it LSU or is it Ohio State? I'd lean more towards LSU.
Wow. Okay. All
Yeah,
right.
and
All right.
that is not so much as to say where things are now,
Sure.
but
Yeah.
it's to say where I think things will eventually go.
Sure. Yeah. There's,
You
I
know,
mean, look, 6 months between recruiting the early
yeah,
signing period, it's just an
right,
ocean of time. Like there's
yeah.
so much
If he was
yeah,
signing tomorrow, I'd say Ohio State.
sure.
But being that it's 6 months out and then forecasting, say, I believe that these variables that we talked about are going to come into play more. The distance from home factor, I think that's going to come into play more down the stretch, just like we see it working, just like we see it with Darius Gray. I think the NIL landscape is going to change with Blaine Bradford. I think that that LSU is going to establish and foster a stronger relationship over these next 6 months and stuff. And so just putting all that stuff in together,
Yeah.
my best, and I guess all it would be is an educational guess right now,
Sure.
but that's what that's where I
Yeah.
would eventually see things going.
Yeah, absolutely. I think when I kind of take a look at it from a roster standpoint, safety is one of those groups, man, where it just feels like they've been missing that superstar talent for a few years now. And they really, I mean, I think Bradford's somebody that would fit that mold of a guy that could come in and be an immediate impact piece for this defense and its future. But I think at the same time, they also have a pretty young core there that they're trying to develop. I mean, you want to talk about guys like Deshawn Spears and you mentioned the three guys that they've already brought in with this class. You're going to have Tamarcus Cooley back next year with another year of eligibility. I think really the only guy that you can feel safe about losing is AJ Halsey at the end of this year because he's out of eligibility. So I think
And
there's a Jordan Gilbert. Yeah, sorry, Jordan Gilbert
Jordan
too.
Gilbert's
Yeah,
a senior
yeah,
too. Yeah.
Gilbert, of course. Yeah. So I think that there's some inroads there that need to be made with Bradford for sure. But I think that he's somebody that can help change the perception of this class and make it to where it's it's a great balance of Louisiana influence plus out of state talent. On the defensive side of the ball in particular, which I think is something that LSU's really wanted to try to put an emphasis on with this class, as we've seen with the 18 commits that they have so far in 2026. So I do just, I mean, just kind of scrolling down through here, I do think that we should touch on just maybe a couple other players, guys that are, maybe rising up the rankings in their senior seasons, or guys that maybe have to have a good senior year to really get on LSU's radar and make that a good fall push. There's always seems to be a couple of guys that kind of enter the mix late in the process. I'm curious if there's any prospects that you've kind of looked at, just talking with people, that if they have those senior seasons that really kind of elevate their game to another level, that you could see LSU maybe getting in the mix for.
Yeah, I think there's several guys, but I think you're also going to see, if you look at it right now and you say, okay, boy, LSU's target list is really small. You got Darius Gray, you got Blaine Bradford.
Yeah.
You could throw Zealand Young from Neville, the wide receiver / tight end on there to see, is he going to gain the weight needed to be able to play tight end? Jermichael Garrett, the central linebacker who was once committed to Auburn, before he committed to Auburn was a big LSU lean. He's a
Yeah.
guy we could potentially see, come into play again. But also you look at the guys like JJ Bush, Manny
Okay.
Ihia Nacho. I'm just tossing some names out there. KJ Edwards is another one.
Yeah.
Who are some other guys? You go back and you look at the positions of guys that LSU either finished number 2 or number 3 for. And those guys are, LSU finished number 2 or number 3 for a reason in their recruitment.
Yeah.
And in this day and age right here, it doesn't take much. Take Oregon, for instance. The Dan Lanning rumors pick up of him leaving, of him jumping to the NFL. What does that do to, what would something like that do to a, recruiting class, especially a 5-star lineman like Ahi Inacho? So all of those guys that LSU almost got that they finished second or third for, or maybe even fourth, a lot of those guys, communication hasn't just dropped off. LSU hasn't just said, okay, you're going so and we're so we're just going to stop recruiting you. The communication is still there.
Yeah.
It's not what it was. There's a little cooling off period that they go where they give them their space, but then as their season picks up and things start happening, teams start winning, teams start losing, guys start decommitting, things of that nature. But some of these guys are going to circle back around.
Mhm.
And so, I don't just look at now the in-state guys who are committed to SEC schools or Big Ten schools like that and say, these are guys these are guys that LSU could circle back around on if they have a big season, because there's even those guys who were once committed. I mean,
Yeah.
you think we've heard the last of Tristan Keys
No.
in Tennessee? You know, uh, who's another one?
I mean,
Jabari Mack. I'm sure Texas is going to come
Kenny
sniffing
Darby
back
in
around on him.
Alabama.
Kenny Darby in Alabama. So
Yeah.
so there's going to be, there's going to be some some names that reemerge that haven't been talked about quite as much. Maybe even a quarterback. We know how big
Yeah.
of a need that's going to be in this class and stuff. So that prospect pool, while it may look like this right now, it's going to be, and we're going to. I'm actually going to touch on some of that later today on the site
Mhm.
of some of those guys who, just because we're not talking about them right now, you got to remember how close LSU came in the race for those guys,
Yeah.
and how that they're going to still be, still be worth monitoring, still be worth following down the stretch.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned the quarterback there. I think fourth, that fourth receiver that they were looking for, they had that handful of players, whether it was Calvin Russell or Jalen Lott or Jace Matthews. Like, I don't think the communication will completely shut down with those guys either. And so maybe they want to add a fourth receiver. Maybe they just want to retain the 3 that they have and are content with that. But yeah, there's still a lot that needs to play out there in terms of potential flip targets down the stretch. But you did mention the one position that I wanted to kind of finish things off with here, and that's quarterback. Like, for me, I know a lot of the fans or a lot of people that follow recruiting closely are very cautiously hesitant as to, or just have very uneasy feelings about why LSU does not have a quarterback signed for a second straight class and what that means. And um, I I think that they're not done yet looking at quarterback and looking at potential options down the stretch. We don't have solid options in terms of guys who are not committed to other places, but there are quarterbacks out there that LSU was very much in the middle of during the process. And I know people don't want to hear it, but the Bryce Underwood effect and what happened last year with him did have a ripple effect, I think, in how LSU wanted to pursue some of its top targets in 2026. And you saw, the big one that LSU kind of really targeted in on or kind of zoned in on was Bo Bentley, and he ended up going to Oklahoma, but they were right there down the stretch with Bo Bentley. I don't think that Bo Bentley's going to be flipping his commitment from Oklahoma. I think that one's a pretty solid one. But I think that there's an avenue here to where LSU can maybe start making, getting its voice back in the mix for a couple of these guys that are committed elsewhere, and see if they can't try to sign a 2026 quarterback. But for me, like, when I look at the future of this position and the immediate future of this position beyond Garrett Nussmeier in 2025, and what's on campus right now with Michael Van Buren and Colin Hurley, I really want to transfer portal quarterback if I'm LSU this year. Like, I think you have to bring in some more experience, some more competition to that room for the immediate term of next year. You'd obviously love to sign a 2026 quarterback and kind of have another freshman, another young quarterback in this mix. But to me, I would really be gunning for a big time portal quarterback this year. And if it comes down to, do we want to sign a 2026 freshman, or do we want to put a lot of pool of money or resources into adding a portal quarterback? I would probably lean the portal route. But I'm just curious what your thoughts are on the quarterback position and kind of the future there as LSU kind of looks ahead to what they're going to have after Nussmeier leaves in 2025.
Well, I don't think Joe Sloan. I don't think Joe Sloan can sign a 2026 high school quarterback and then go out and get a transfer quarterback, and then say, "Oh, by the way, hey, Colton Nussmeier, we got a perfect situation lined up for you here." I don't see that happening. I think LSU's quarterback room. I think LSU's quarterback room is going to go through a myriad of changes. I'll be shocked. I'll be surprised if they sign a 2026 high school quarterback. I think you're going to have to go out. You're going to have to get somebody out of the portal, an experienced guy who you're going to bring in, who you say, okay, either this guy or Michael Van Buren is going to start for me.
Yeah.
But then what's that going to do to Colin Hurley?
Yeah.
What's Michael Van Buren going to do if you bring in a Jaden Daniels type of guy, and Michael Van Buren doesn't win the job, and the other guy wins the job? And obviously that competition is going to play out and stuff. But I think LSU is really in a situation to where it's very easy for me to picture a situation to where LSU goes into next year with 2 scholarship quarterbacks.
Yeah.
Possible. I think that's very possible. One of them being a bona fide starter who's coming in from a big time transfer, kind of like you saw with Jaden Daniels or Joden Burrow type, who just comes in. But then it's going to really create a testy situation for Van Buren and or Hurley.
Yeah, it's very true. So, I mean, Van Buren will be entering his third college season, Hurley as well. So, and Van Buren's the guy that's got the SEC experience. He's got, the 8 games under his belt. And look, I will say this for Van Buren, like the first couple weeks of fall camp, did not look great. I mean, like for him or for Hurley with the second team, I will say these last couple of practices, Michael Van Buren's starting to settle in. He's making some good throws. He's going to be in that mix in terms of competition and starting in the spring. And I think that's, for me, where this thing really is going to be interesting is, okay, you sign a guy in the winter portal class. Are you able to get all 3 of those guys into the competition for the spring? Hurley, Van Buren, and portal quarterback X. Are you going to have a legitimate 3-man competition there, or is one of those quarterbacks going to bolt in the winter and go somewhere else? Like that's where I think things are going to get very interesting for the quarterback spot. So I don't know if you have any other thoughts about that, or just
no, I don't.
There's just so many. There's so many ways that position could play out here over the next several months, and we're gonna have it all covered for you guys over at the Go 24/7 site, and we'll follow. Hope you guys can follow along on our podcast. I would like to just kind of end things off here by asking you to subscribe to the channel. Wherever you're learning or listening to your podcast, make sure you're signed up there as well. It really helps us out. But we got more fall camp, and Clemson's right around the corner, guys. I mean, we're less than 3 weeks away from Clemson, and certainly a big decision here in the next 10 days with Darius Gray, the 5-star offensive lineman as well. So make sure you're tuned into the Go 24/7 site and our podcast as we continue to bring you all the updates.